The Prilorians erupted in mocking laughter as the relic-powered armor was unveiled, but that laughter died in their alien throats as the human warbeasts roared to life and charged into the fray. Keith Griffin scowled at the view screen dominating the Prilorian warship's bridge. A grizzled human veteran, his combat instincts screamed that the op was foobar before it even started. These scaly Prilorian assholes were setting him up to fail. General Karros sneered down at Keith, the shimmering scales of his uniform barely concealing his disdain. "So the Council sends a human to do a Prilorian's job. They must be truly desperate." Keith fixed the general with a smirk. "I wouldn't be here if your boys could handle it themselves. What's the matter? One of your top-secret toys go missing?" Karros scowled, his lizard eyes narrowing to slits. He gestured sharply and a hologram snapped into focus, displaying a heavily fortified Prilorian military base. Station Typhon, our most advanced research facility, developing technologies your feeble human mind cannot even comprehend. Presumed compromised, all personnel lost. The prototypes developed there are too dangerous to fall into the wrong claws. Keith crossed his arms. "And just whose claws are you expecting to snatch 'em up?" The Prilorian general growled low in his throat. "We suspect a rogue faction within our own ranks, but Prilorian custom forbids us from directly moving against our own. The Galactic Council insisted on an outsider, and you're the only human to survive our combat training before we cut ties with your backwater planet." Karros stomped over to an equipment crate bearing Council seals. He wrenched the lid open, revealing a pristine set of old human-powered combat armor. "The Council has provided you with this antique, but make no mistake, human, this would be a suicide mission even for my most elite fire teams." The guards guffawed and elbowed each other as Keith stripped down and began suiting up. Their laughter echoed through the bridge until Keith fired up the armor and straightened to his full augmented height, grinning ferally beneath the visor. "Enough chatter. I'm going to need a drop pod. It's time to wake some beasts from hibernation. Lock and load, boys. We're going in hot." The ship's launch bay opened, revealing the dark side of the planet below. Keith's drop pod shot out like a bullet, plummeting towards the surface. Inside the cramped pod, Keith took a moment to examine the Mark VII hoplite armor encasing his body. It had seen plenty of action during the Human-Vornak War, but the servos still moved smoothly and the power cells were at full charge. The Prilorians may have mocked it as a relic, but this armor was still light years ahead of what the Vornaks had back in the day. To the Prilorians, though, the hoplite was practically Stone Age tech. They'd experimented with it briefly after the war, but quickly discarded it as being too tame for their soldiers. He pulled up the station schematics on his TACnet display. The place was a damn maze, all winding corridors and security checkpoints wrapped around the central server room like layers of an onion, and that server room was his target, nestled deep in the heart of the facility. Retrieving the data wasn't going to be a cakewalk. The plan was to blast his way in, grab the goods and get out the other side where the terrain could hide him from any eyes in the sky. Doable, except for the metric fuck-ton of hostiles part. Even for a human in a hoplite, covering that much ground solo was going to be a tall order. The pod juddered around him as AA fire peppered the outer hull. The ablative shielding was taking a beating, but it held together. Keith readied his M99 gas rifle, slamming a power cell home. Obsolete or not, it would do the job. The M99 drew from the same power source as the hoplite. No need to fuck around with ammo in the field. Deceleration hit like a hammer, the pod slamming into the surface hard enough to rattle Keith's teeth. He was moving before the hatch finished opening, sprinting for the facility a half-click ahead. His sensors lit up with multiple pings, tangos closing in fast and hard. Time to roll out the welcome mat. The sound of gunfire filled Keith's ears as his sensors pinged 6 contacts rushing in hard. He raised his M99, taking aim at the lead target, a Prilorian insurgent outfitted with military-grade weapons and armor, but clearly no soldier. Keith pulled the trigger, and a hypersonic Gauss round punched through the merc's skull and kept going, dropping the hostile behind him too. Keith was already moving, zigzagging across the rocky terrain as blaster bolts sizzled past. His armor's servos whirred smoothly as he slid into cover behind a large boulder. Popping up, Keith sighted down his rifle and methodically picked off the remaining hostiles before they could coordinate and pin him down. As the final body thudded to the dirt, Keith frowned. This was Prilorian gear for sure, but these guys were sloppy, their fire undisciplined, their tactics non-existent. Pirate scum or insurgents, not professional troops. Keith retrieved one of the mercs' rifles, examining it. The fire selector was locked into full auto. Keith snorted. Yup, definitely not military. Pocketing the rifle's power cell as a spare for his own weapon, Keith set off towards the facility at a dead run. The hoplite's mechanical muscles engaged, propelling Keith forward at a breathtaking 50 kilometers per hour. The outer walls grew rapidly in his visor as he ate up the distance. 100 meters out, a storm of blaster fire erupted from the parapets above. Keith hit the dirt, his shield flaring as it absorbed the incoming barrage. He raised his Gauss rifle, letting the hoplite's targeting system line up the shot. The crosshairs settled over a sniper, and Keith squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. 3 snipers pitched backwards off the parapet, trailing blood. In the momentary lull as the defenders ducked for cover, Keith ripped a date charge from his combat webbing. He lobbed the explosive at the wall and charged directly at the detonation, his rifle up and hungry for more. Keith barrels through the smoking hole in the outer wall, blaster bolts sizzling past his helmet. He lands in a combat roll, servos whirring as he snaps his rifle up and cuts down the defenders in a chattering hail of Gauss rounds. Sprinting for the nearest structure, Keith leaps straight through a window in a crash of shattering glass. The mercs inside whirl, caught off guard. Keith slams his rifle butt into the first one's faceplate, caving it in with a sickening crunch. He grabs the limp body, using it as a shield while drilling shots into the others with machine-like precision. In heartbeats, it's over. Keith lets the perforated corpse drop, already moving on. "Herd ping nav point," he barks. A mini-map blinks to life on his visor, a glowing dot marking the server room's location. 3 levels down, 200 meters north, the AI confirms. Multiple hostiles detected en route. Fan-fucking-tastic. Keith slaps a fresh power cell into his rifle. He toggles his armor to assault mode, the exoskeleton humming as it diverts power from speed to strength. Ripping a maintenance hatch off the wall, Keith drops into the duct, sliding down until he judges he's bypassed the heaviest resistance at his entry point. His armored fist punches clean through the duct floor, and he drops into some kind of research lab packed with alien tech. None of it matches the schematics of his objective. Keith turns to head for the exit and freezes. Looming over him is a hulking combat mech, all gleaming alloy and brutal lines. Keith's eyes widen. He'd recognize that model anywhere. A top-of-the-line Prilorian war machine, packing enough firepower to level a city block. The mech's arm cannons swivel to aim dead at Keith's chest. The human moves, hurling himself behind a bank of instruments an instant before a torrent of plasma fire reduces them to molten slag. "Fuck this," he snarled, clenching his fists. The hoplite's forearm plates shifted and reconfigured, unsheathing twin chain blades. Each serrated link was honed to a monomolecular edge, hungry for the mech's vital systems. Inside the machine, the pilot swiveled his sensors, tracking Keith's heat signature through the smoke. Micro-missiles streaked from launch tubes, locking on. Keith exploded from cover, legs pistoning. He wove between detonations as the missiles stitched a path of destruction behind him. The mech rotated, building-sized blasters flaying the room. Keith juked left, then cut right, leaping onto a workbench. He coiled and sprung, hoplite jets flaring. Slamming onto the mech's shoulder, he plunged both chain blades into its primary optics. The blades screamed against reinforced armor, chewing through layer after layer. Servos strained as Keith forced the blades deeper. With a shower of sparks, they erupted from the Titan's back. Keith ripped the blades free, backflipping off as the ruined mech crashed to the floor dead. He hit the ground running, snatching up his rifle. No time to catch his breath. That pilot had definitely screamed for backup. He sprinted for the exit, following his HUD's nav point. He had to reach the server room before they boxed him in. He skidded around a corner, spotting the elevators ahead, and at least a score of mercenaries, blasters already flaring as they charged his position. "Contact front," Keith barked, rifle snapping up. The weapon bucked in his grip, spitting hypersonic death. He dashed left, then right, somehow keeping ahead of their fire. Blaster bolts hissed past his helmet, near misses, searing his shields. Keith sighted a target, the merc's skull exploding an instant later. Another fell, clutching the hole in his chest. The merc scattered, seeking cover. Keith dove forward, rolling into the open elevator. "Close doors," he roared. The hatch slammed shut. Keith slumped against the wall, his breath coming hard and fast. He checked his rifle's power cell, half depleted. "HUD ETA to server room." 30 seconds, his AI replied. "Be advised, I'm detecting multiple hostiles converging on that location." "It's gonna be a real party." Keith slapped a fresh cell into the M99 as the elevator descended into the bowels of the facility. Keith barrels into the horde of pirates, rifle barking in his hands. The weapon clicks empty, and Keith hurls it, knocking the lead pirate flat. The human leaps into the fray, chain blades extending from his gauntlets with a metallic shriek. He slashes left and right, the monomolecular edges carving through armor, flesh and bone with equal ease. Severed limbs fly. Keith spins and whirls, his hoplite armor a blur of motion. Blaster bolts ricochet off his shields as he leaves a trail of dismembered bodies in his wake. A shot slams into Keith's side, his shield flaring bright as it barely holds. Keith snarls and snatches the nearest pirate, shoving the flailing alien ahead of him as a living shield. He bulls forward, hostiles falling before him. Until his boot slams into the elevator doors, Keith flings his meat shield into the remaining pirates and pounds the descend button. He dives through the closing doors as blaster fire hammers the metal. In the elevator, Keith drags in ragged breaths. His HUD flashes a warning, shield at 15%. It won't survive another exchange like that. The doors hiss open and Keith tenses, chain blades humming. But only quiet greets him. He emerges cautiously into a massive chamber, dominated by rows of towering cylindrical tanks. Keith scans for threats and finds none. He approaches the nearest tank, peering through the murky fluid, and recoils in shock. A Prilorian floats within, half its body replaced with cybernetic parts in a grotesque fusion of flesh and machine. Keith's eyes dart from tank to tank. Each contains a similar abomination, Prilorians augmented with machinery in a twisted parody of his own power armor. The implication hits Keith like a punch to the gut. The Prilorians weren't just researching weapons, they were weaponizing themselves. He whirls at a sound behind him, chain blades flashing up. A feminine figure steps from the shadows, her face plated with sleek metal, her eyes burning with crimson light. "Magnificent, aren't they?" Her voice is melodic and cold. The next step in Prilorian ascension, soldiers transformed into living weapons. The female laughs, a harsh electronic sound. "And I suppose you think your primitive armor is any different? You're as much a weapon as these creations, human. The only difference is the purity of our vision." "Lady, I don't know what your vision involves," Keith growls, "but it sure as hell ain't pure." The cyborg's face twists in a sneer. She flicks her wrist, and an arc of lightning leaps from her palm, slamming into Keith and hurling him back against the tanks. The female stalks towards him, electricity crackling around her hands. "You humans are relics of a bygone age, hiding in your metal shells, wielding weapons you barely comprehend. You've already lost this war, you just don't know it yet." Keith pushes himself up on an elbow, his chain blades carving gouges in the floor. "Sister, the only thing I'm going to lose is my patience if you keep yapping." He lunges at her, blades thirsting for blood. She meets his charge with a flash of lightning, the chamber erupting into a storm of arcing electricity and screaming metal. Keith's blood runs cold as his HUD blares a warning. Unknown cybernetic signatures detected. He spins around, chain blades humming, to see a dozen of the grotesque tanks beginning to drain with a gurgle their mutant occupants twitching as unholy life floods into their veins. There's no time to investigate. Keith guns his hoplite, servos screaming as he sprints for the far side of the chamber. His tac map shows a security station there, heavily reinforced, if he can just reach it. A tank shatters behind him, a nightmarish fusion of Prilorian and machine rising from the shards. Its blazing eyes lock onto Keith, and it lets out a bellowing roar, piston-driven legs propelling it after him at terrifying speed. Keith pushes his armor harder, the heat from his straining servos washing over him. He hazards a glance over his shoulder and immediately wishes he hadn't. More tanks are rupturing, disgorging more of the augmented horrors. They bound after him, quickly eating up the distance. Proximity alerts flare across Keith's visor as he slams into the security door, fingers stabbing the entry code. The lead abomination is nearly on top of him, its talons gouging the alloy mere centimeters from his head. The door swooshes open. Keith doesn't hesitate, throwing himself into a roll that carries him across the threshold. He rights himself and hammers his gauntlet on the emergency lockdown. Glass doors engage instantly, slamming down like the fist of an angry god. The cyborg's claws screech as they rake across the barrier, but it holds. Barely. Gasping, Keith turns to the security room's terminal, searching for answers. He jacks his gauntlet in, code streaming across his HUD. What he finds turns his guts to ice. Project Chimera. The unholy fusion of Prilorian flesh and experimental human cybertech, living weapons, half organic, half machine. And according to the data, this is only the beginning. The rogue Prilorians intend to use this vile research to build an army, to overthrow the Council, and seize the reins of galactic power for themselves. Keith burns the files to his onboard drive. This intel is too critical. He has to get it to the Council, has to stop this madness before it dooms them all. A thunderous boom shakes the security station as the cyborgs begin hammering on the blast door, warping the reinforced metal. It won't hold them for long. Keith's eyes dart across the security feeds, desperate for an escape route. The blast door shudders under another thunderous impact, the metal deforming dangerously. There, a maintenance access tunnel, barely large enough for him to squeeze through in his armor. According to the schematics, it should come out near the server room. It's not ideal, but it beats waiting around to get torn apart by those cybernetic horrors. Keith wrenches the access hatch open, the shriek of abused metal lost in the din of the cyborg's assault. He hauls himself into the cramped tunnel, his hoplite scraping and sparking against the sides. Behind him, the blast door gives way with a tortured groan, followed by the screech of claws on metal. Keith pulls himself forward hand over hand, teeth gritted, servos straining. He tries to block out the sounds of pursuit, focusing on the faint light ahead marking a junction. He consults his map, picking the left fork. If he's reading this right, that should take him almost directly to the server room. Of course, there's no telling what fresh hells await him on the other side. Shimmying around the bend, Keith freezes. His helmet lamp glints off a metal grate just ahead, and the baleful red optic glowering at him from the other side. A squawk of surprise is torn from Keith's throat as a cybernetic claw explodes through the grate, clamping around his neck in a vice grip. It drags him through the shredded metal, servos screaming in protest, and hurls him like a rag doll. Keith crashes into a server bank in a shower of sparks, his shield flaring as it absorbs the impact. Alerts flash across his HUD. Shield integrity critical, servos damaged, reactor temperature climbing. He lurches to his feet, shaking his head to clear it. The cyborg ducks through the ruined wall, a hulking nightmare of flesh and metal. Malevolent intelligence burns in its eyes as it levels an arm at Keith, a glowing aperture in its palm. Keith has a split second to register the danger, before a torrent of plasma engulfs him. The temperature in his armor spikes to near-lethal levels, his shield struggling to compensate. Keith grits his teeth against the searing heat, rolling desperately to the side. He comes up in a crouch, chain blades leaping from his gauntlets. The superheated air scalds his lungs as he springs at the cyborg, blades hungry for blood. They slash across the monster's chest, parting composite armor and sending it staggering back. But it recovers quickly, far too quickly for something that size. Keith presses the attack, chain blades a whirling dervish of flashing steel. Yet for every cut he scores, the cyborg's nanite-laced flesh knits itself back together in seconds. It's toying with him, Keith realizes with a sinking feeling, playing with its food before the kill. The cyborg's claw lashes out, faster than Keith's eye can follow. It closes around his torso like an industrial vice, lifting him off his feet as if he weighed nothing. Keith's bones creak in protest as the pressure mounts, his armor buckling. The cyborg slams him against the wall once, twice, a third time. Stars explode across Keith's vision, darkness eating at the edges. Emergency alerts wail in his ears. Multiple fractures detected, internal bleeding, life signs critical. Through the haze of pain, Keith feels the cyborg's grip shift to his throat. Its claws dig into the flexible joint between helmet and cuirass, piercing his gel layer. The monster's face looms before him, a monstrous leer twisting its mangled features. Pathetic, it grates, its voice like grinding gears. This is the best the humans have to offer? Your species is even weaker than I thought. It punctuates the words by slamming Keith into the wall again, the human going limp in its grasp. The cyborg chuckles darkly, a sound like an avalanche. It raises its other hand, claws extended to eviscerate. and screams, a plasma bolt punching clean through its shoulder. The monster drops Keith, whirling to face this new threat with an enraged howl. But then a plasma bolt sizzles through the air, slamming into the cyborg's shoulder and spinning the monstrosity around with an enraged roar. Keith slumps to the floor, gasping for air, as a familiar figure strides into the server room, General Karos himself, a smoking plasma pistol in his clawed hand. "General?" Keith croaks, struggling to rise. What are you—" "Later," Karos snaps, leveling his pistol at the cyborg. "We have to get you out of here." The cyborg lunges, its remaining arm morphing into a crackling energy blade. Karos sidesteps the blow and fires point-blank into the monster's face, blasting away its remaining optic. It bellows in agony, but keeps coming, slashing blindly. Karos ducks and weaves, his scales flashing as he pummels the cyborg with punishing blows. But even blind and wounded, the thing is monstrously strong. It catches the general with a wild haymaker, sending him crashing into a bank of equipment. Keith watches the battle unfold through hazy vision, his blood pooling beneath him. The general is putting up a hell of a fight, but the cyborg is just too powerful. It's only a matter of time. Grimacing, Keith drags himself towards the battling figures, leaving a crimson smear in his wake. His reactor screams a warning, the heat building to unbearable levels. He's a dead man walking, but he'll be damned if he doesn't take this abomination with him. "General!" Keith shouts, his voice raw. "Get clear!" Karos turns, his eyes widening as he sees Keith staggering towards them, the human's armor glowing white-hot. Understanding dawns and the general nods grimly, blasting the cyborg back with a volley of shots before diving for cover. Keith hits the cyborg in a flying tackle, bearing it to the ground. The thing writhes and thrashes, but Keith holds on with the strength of the damned, even as the reactor's heat sears his flesh. Through the haze of pain, he sees the upload hit 100%. It's done. With a final titanic effort, Keith wrenches the reactor from his armor, the safety interlocks screaming as they disengage. He slams the overloading device into the cyborg's chest, a savage grin splitting his face. The world goes white. A searing wave of heat and force erupts from the dying reactor, engulfing man and machine alike. The cyborg's metallic shriek is lost in the roar of the explosion as it's vaporized instantly, along with everything else in the server room. The entire facility shudders under the blast, the upper levels collapsing in on themselves like a house of cards. Fireballs erupt from shattered windows as secondary explosions rip through the labs, setting off a chain reaction of destruction. By the time the dust settles, there's nothing left but a smoldering crater, wisps of smoke curling from the blasted rubble. No trace remains of the horrors birthed within those walls, nor of the man who gave everything to expose them. Miles above, a Prilorian shuttle claws for the stars, its hull pitted and scored. In the cockpit, General Karos slumps over the controls, his features grim. The failure of Project Chimera is a bitter pill, but its exposure is a fatal blow to the insurgency. There will be a reckoning for this, and the general intends to mete it out personally. But as he inputs the coordinates for the Council's stronghold, Karos spares a thought for the human operative who made it all possible. Keith Griffin, a name that will be etched into the annals of galactic history. A man who stared into the abyss and didn't blink, even at the cost of his own life. The shuttle streaks into warp, carrying its precious cargo of secrets to those who will ensure they never again see the light of day. And in its wake, a legend is born, the tale of a lone human who changed the course of a war, and in so doing, forever altered the galactic balance of power. On the Council's capital world, the data burst arrives like a thunderbolt, sending shock waves through the halls of power. The true scope of the Prilorian experiments is laid bare, the insidious melding of flesh and machine in a bid for galactic domination. The councillors watch in grim silence as the files unspool, each more damning than the last. This is an existential threat, a dagger aimed at the heart of their order. It cannot be allowed to stand. "Summon the fleets," the head councillor says, his voice hard as steel. "We end this now and forever, for every world under our protection, for every soul lost to this madness." His eyes fall on the final entry in the data stream, a single line of text that sears itself into his mind. "Operative lost, Keith Griffin, human killed in action." "And for him," the councillor finishes softly, "the hero who gave us this chance at the cost of everything, we will not let his sacrifice be in vain." As the Council's mighty armada assembles, the name Keith Griffin spreads like wildfire through the ranks. A rallying cry, a reminder of what true courage looks like in the face of overwhelming odds. Every soldier, every pilot, every technician and medic, they all know his story. They all carry a piece of his legend into the battle to come. And when that battle is joined, when the Council's forces clash with the twisted abominations of the Prilorian insurgency, they fight with a fury born of righteous anger and unbreakable resolve. They fight for every world, every life, every dream threatened by this cancerous evil. But most of all, they fight for a man they never knew. A human who stared down the darkness and didn't flinch. A man who taught them the true meaning of sacrifice, and in so doing, rewrote the stars themselves. They fight for Keith Griffin, the hero of the Prilorian War. And in the end, as the last of the enemy falls and the guns fall silent, they raise their fists to the heavens and cry out his name, a promise and a prayer in one. In that moment, a legend is forged, an indelible mark on the tapestry of history. The legend of a human named Keith Griffin, who showed the galaxy what it means to be a hero. And in the telling and retelling of that legend, a simple truth emerges, that as long as there are those willing to stand against the darkness, no matter the cost, there is hope for us all. In the days following Keith Griffin's sacrifice, the Galactic Council chamber buzzed with grim activity. Representatives from a dozen star-spanning civilizations filed into the cavernous hall, their faces etched with shock and anger as they took their seats. At the podium, Councillor Zathax, a towering insectoid draped in shimmering robes, called the session to order. His faceted eyes swept the room, mandibles clicking in agitation. "The human operative's data has been analyzed," he began without preamble, his voice a rasping hiss. "The implications are deeply troubling." A holographic display flared to life above the central dais, the damning evidence laid bare for all to see. Gruesome images of the Prilorian cyborgs, interrogation transcripts from captured scientists, financial records tracing back to the highest levels of the Prilorian government. Murmurs of outrage rippled through the chamber, quickly swelling to a cacophony of angry shouts and pounding fists. Zathax slammed a chitinous appendage against the podium, his amplified voice booming over the din. "There are calls for immediate action against the Prilorians," he shouted. "Sanctions, embargoes, even military strikes. We must—" The councillor's words cut off as a new file suddenly flashed onto the display. The chamber fell eerily silent as the representatives processed the shocking revelation. The cyborg's human components had not been stolen or reverse-engineered, as initially believed. They had been given freely, supplied by a clandestine human organization known as Cerberus. Surveillance vids showed Prilorian leaders meeting with cloaked human figures, shaking hands over the transfer of mysterious cargo pods. Zathak swiveled his head to pin the human delegation with an accusing glare. "Explain this, Ambassador. Your species has some answering to do." The human representative, an older man with a face like weathered stone, rose slowly to his feet. He seemed to carry the weight of worlds on his shoulders. "I assure you the Systems Alliance had no knowledge of these dealings. Cerberus is a rogue element, operating outside our authority. We do not condone—" "Lies!" a Krolatian delegate screeched, leaping up and stabbing a finger at the human. "The humans are clearly complicit in this atrocity. They should face the same consequences as the Prilorians." Shouts of agreement echoed from the Krolatians' allies. The human ambassador's face darkened, his voice dropping to a warning growl. "Any punitive action against Earth would be an act of war. The Alliance will defend its sovereignty." The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade poised to drop. For a long, tense moment, the Council teetered on the brink. Then Zathax raised his appendages, palms outward in a placating gesture. "We will take no rash actions here today, but know this, Ambassador. Humanity's standing in this body has been deeply damaged. You have much to answer for." In the end, the Council voted to adjourn without levying any formal accusations against Earth. But as the human delegation filed out, they could feel the weight of hostile stares boring into their backs. The Prilorian ambassador, a sleek female with iridescent scales, paused before the council dais. She bowed her head in a show of contrition. "The Ascendancy deeply regrets the actions of the extremist faction responsible for these crimes. They will be hunted down and brought to justice. You have my word." But even as she spoke, unseen currents swirled beneath the surface. In shadowed halls and encrypted transmissions, whispers passed between powerful figures, their tones not of condemnation, but of dark fascination. The potential of the human-Prilorian hybrid technology had been laid bare on the broken fields of Typhon. For those with the vision and the will to seize it, a new horizon beckoned, filled with power beyond imagining. The seeds that Keith Griffin sowed in blood and fire took root in the hearts of the ambitious and the ruthless. Even as the council races retreated to their holdings, suspicion and resentment festering like open wounds, covetous eyes turned to the stars, hungry to claim the future. A future born in the fusion of flesh and machine, a synthesis of human drive and alien techno-sorcery, a future where only the strong would survive. And so the cycle ground on, darkness rising to meet the dawn. The dream of unity faded, consumed by the same ancient appetites that had driven the Prilorian project: greed, hatred, the lust for dominion. These hungers could not be checked by laws or treaties or high-minded ideals. They could only be sated in the crucible of war, in the struggle for existence that was every species' birthright. In the end, perhaps it had always been inevitable. The grand experiment of the Council, the dream of disparate races working in harmony, a fragile illusion, now shattered like glass. What emerged from the ruins would be a harder thing, cold and unyielding. An order built not on hope, but on the oldest, most inviolable law. Only the fit would endure, and the galaxy would tremble before them. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.